Have you ever left a place before even departing? You know what that's like, being present but with something still stuck in the past. In a moment, in a person, in a version of yourself that should have stayed in the past but insists on traveling along. That you are someone who has been through a lot and still stood. That you know what pain is, you know what loss is, you know what it's like to look at an impossible situation and find a way to get through it. And that's true. But there's a question that rarely comes along with that belief, and it's uncomfortable enough for most to avoid. When was the last time you truly let something go? It didn't survive, it didn't overcome it in theory. It wasn't locked away in a drawer, it truly let go. It was allowed to move on. It opened its hand and let it follow its own path without you in it. Scorpio carries a reputation, that of the sign of transformation, of death and rebirth, of the strength that emerges from the ashes. And this reputation is not a lie, but it hides a layer that almost no one names directly. Because before being the sign that is reborn, Scorpio is the sign you hold on to, that you guard, that you protect what you have lived with a loyalty that borders on the absolute. And for a long time this worked. It worked because the world showed Scorpio very early on that things change without warning, that people leave, that the ground can disappear beneath their feet in an instant. And in the face of this, saving became a strategy, saving became survival, saving became over time identity. The problem isn't the act of holding on to things, it's what happens when what you hold on to has already served its purpose. When the resentment you kept close as a reminder of your strength has become a burden you carry without even realizing it. When the bond that no longer existed continues to occupy space. When the old version of you, the one that survived that situation, is still there, operating, making decisions, filtering the world through the eyes of someone still stuck in that moment that happened years ago. Have you ever felt that strange fatigue, that feeling that you're putting in all your effort, but the results fall short of what you know you're capable of? That opportunities come along but don't quite fit? That relationships reach a point and then stop? Not for lack of love, but for lack of space. There's an explanation for that, and it's not about what's missing in your life. It's about what you haven't yet been able to let go of. Think of a backpack you've used every day for as long as you can remember. At first, you felt the weight. Today, you don't even notice it anymore. But the weight is still there. It continues to consume energy. It continues to slightly curve your posture without you even realizing it. And you keep accumulating more things inside it because the backpack is big, because you're strong, because you can handle it. But enduring and thriving are not the same thing. Scorpio has a tendency, stemming from the genuine depth of this sign, to build identity from what it has survived. Each pain overcome becomes a brick. Each betrayal that didn't destroy becomes another layer of protection. Each difficult cycle you've weathered without collapsing becomes part of the narrative of who you are. And that has beauty, it has strength, it has something true about it. But there is a difference between carrying an experience as wisdom and carrying it as a burden, between integrating what you have lived through and remaining trapped within it. And it is precisely in this difference that lies the blockage that prevents many Scorpios from achieving the prosperity they are seeking. Because prosperity, true prosperity, the kind that nourishes and doesn't just impress, demands space. It demands that you approach it with open hands, not empty hands, open hands. What if your hands are busy holding what shouldn't be there anymore? You can't receive what's coming. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. It's not a book that tells you to drop everything and start from scratch. That kind of superficial advice was never meant for Scorpio. It's a book that helps you understand what's still trapped inside you, why it's trapped, and what opens up when you finally decide to go deeper than the pain. Scorpio instinctively understands that the surface lies, that the real answer is never on the first layer. And this book was written for those who already know this, but are still searching for the right tools to descend to where true transformation happens. You are at an exact moment right now, still processing, with that strange and uncomfortable question active inside you. What am I still holding on to that I shouldn't be? This is the best possible time to access this material, not when the discomfort has passed, not when you've already rationalized everything. Now, while the question is still fresh in your mind. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And in the comments tell me, what's something you know you should have let go of, but that when you stop and be honest, you realize you're still holding on to? Write it down. Just naming it will start something moving. There's a word that Scorpio uses a lot, sometimes aloud, sometimes only internally, which is loyalty. Loyalty to the people who matter. Loyalty to promises made. Loyalty to what has been experienced. And this loyalty is real. It's not performance. It's not posturing. It's one of the most genuine things that exists in the nature of this sign. Except there's a point where loyalty folds in on itself and starts working in reverse. And Scorpio, of all the signs, is the most vulnerable to this tipping point, precisely because it feels so deeply that it becomes difficult to distinguish between commitment and imprisonment. Think of a situation you're carrying with you. It could be a relationship that ended, a hurt that was never fully resolved, a decision you made or that was made for you, that remains like a stumbling block. A version of yourself that formed at that moment and still operates on autopilot, taking actions that no longer represent who you are today. You still call that loyalty, but perhaps it's time to ask, loyalty to what exactly? To what it was? To what you feared losing? To the proof that it mattered? Because importing is one thing, and being stuck inside that system is something completely different. There's a ship captain in a story that's stuck in my head. His ship sank. The tragedy was real, the pain was real. And after it all, he returned to port, took another ship, and stood at the helm, gazing at the horizon where the first ship had sunk, unable to turn back. Out of loyalty, out of respect, out of fear that turning his back would mean diminishing what had been lost. And the new boat remained stationary. And the horizon on the other side grew ever more distant, and the prosperity that could have arrived waited, patiently but without stopping time, while he continued to look back. Scorpios do this, more often than they admit, not because they are weak, but because they are too deep to accept that the past can simply be left behind without ceremony. And this depth is, paradoxically, what makes the process of letting go so slow and so intense for this sign. The weight isn't just in the big things. It's not just in the obvious losses, the relationships that ended, the situations that clearly belong in the past. It's also in the little things, in that conversation from years ago that you revisit sometimes for no apparent reason, in that opportunity that didn't happen and that you still wonder from time to time what it would have been like. In that version of yourself that had different plans, different expectations, and that at some point needed to be abandoned, but perhaps was never truly said goodbye. Scorpio carries all of this and carries it well, with dignity, with a capacity for containment that few signs possess. But there is a difference between containing with wisdom and containing because you don't know what to do with what's inside. When we don't know what to do with something we feel, we keep it to ourselves. And when we keep it long enough, it becomes integrated. It becomes part of the structure. And removing a part of the structure, even a part that is weighing us down, even a part that is cracking the walls, seems to threaten the entire building. That's why Scorpio sometimes prefers to carry the burden rather than risk what comes after letting go of it. But here's what needs to be said clearly. There's a version of you waiting on the other side, a version that can only appear when the current version, the one that still holds on, still protects, still resists, finally says goodbye. It doesn't disappear. It isn't erased. It just makes room. And this space is what prosperity needs to arrive. What you've just recognized, that fine line between genuine loyalty and silent imprisonment, is one of the most important discoveries Scorpio can make about themselves. And the digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, delves into exactly that. How to distinguish in practice what's worth carrying from what's costing you more than it sustains you, according to the specific psychology of your sign. This content was created for those who aren't satisfied with superficial answers, and you clearly aren't. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Percent cent, GTA 5% cent. So what does letting go mean in practice? Because this word appears in so many places that it has lost almost all the weight it should have. Let go, release, free, as if it were simple, as if it were enough to decide. That's not how it works for Scorpio, and maybe it never will be. For this sign, letting go isn't a moment, it's a process. It's a choice that needs to be made more than once, in layers, as you descend into regions of yourself that most people never reach. Because Scorpio doesn't have shallow depths, it has abysses, and in those abysses things remain hidden for a long time before surfacing. There's something important that needs to be said about this process. It doesn't begin with a grand decision. It doesn't begin with a closing ritual, a difficult conversation, a dramatic moment of surrender. It almost always begins with a small, honest question asked in a quiet moment. The question is, does this still serve who I am becoming? Not who you were, not who you needed to be to survive that phase, who you are becoming now, who you want to be in the next cycle of your life. That's the right question. And Scorpio, when allowed to ask it honestly, usually already knows the answer before finishing the sentence. The problem isn't not knowing. The problem is that knowing requires action. And action means admitting that something you carried with such care, with such loyalty, with such strength, no longer fits into what is being built. But here's what distinguishes letting go from forgetting. And that distinction is fundamental for Scorpio to be able to make that move without feeling like they're betraying themselves. Letting go doesn't erase what was. It doesn't diminish what mattered. It doesn't say the pain was unnecessary or that the bond wasn't real. Letting go is an active choice for those who will carry this as wisdom, integrated, digested, transformed into fuel, and not as a burden. Not as an anchor, not as the reason why the next step is being postponed. Think of the phoenix, not the phoenix of generic myth that rises from the ashes. Anyone can quote that. Think of what the phoenix actually does. It doesn't deny the fire. It doesn't pretend it didn't burn. It doesn't carry the ashes in its pocket as proof that it survived. It rises, and the fire that consumed it becomes part of who it is, not of the place where it is. That's the difference. And it is precisely here that Scorpio's most difficult issue manifests itself, because this sign wants to be true to what it has lived. It wants to honor each cycle, each experience, each version of itself that had to exist so that the current one could stand. And the good news is, you can do this. You can honor without carrying burdens. You can acknowledge without getting stuck. You can take the wisdom without carrying the weight. But it demands a conscious choice. It demands that you ask yourself, for each thing you are holding on to, does this still serve who I am becoming? Or does it only serve who I needed to be? When the answer is honest, and Scorpios possess a capacity for honesty that runs deep like few others, what to do with it becomes clearer, not easier, clearer. And clarity for Scorpio has always been the beginning of everything. There's a specific moment that those who have gone through this process describe in similar ways, regardless of the situation. It's the moment after the decision to let go, after the process, which isn't an afternoon, sometimes it's months, after going deep enough to find what was stored there, giving it a name, and consciously deciding that you're not going to carry it that way anymore. What people describe isn't lightness in the sense of emptiness. It's lightness in the sense of spaciousness. It's the feeling that the field of possibilities has expanded, that conversations that weren't possible before now happen naturally, that opportunities that previously seemed impossible are beginning to appear, not because the world has changed, but because you've created the openness to receive them. For Scorpio, this moment has a particular quality, because when this sign genuinely releases something, truly, deeply, intentionally, what emerges on the other side is not emptiness. It's strength. It's a kind of quiet power that doesn't need to prove anything, that doesn't need to hold anything back, that knows, in a way that goes far beyond reason, that the next cycle is greater than the previous one. Imagine a door. Not just any door, one you've tried to open for a long time. You pushed, pulled, banged, and it never opened. And you came to the conclusion that maybe that door wasn't meant for you, that what was on the other side wasn't available. But that door opens outwards, and you've spent all this time pulling it. The effort was real. The dedication was real. The pain of not succeeding was real. But the direction was wrong. And nobody had told you that because nobody could see it from where you were. Scorpio, when they reveal something truthful, discover that there was such a door somewhere in their own life, and that the prosperity that was on the other side hadn't disappeared. It was waiting, patient, available, just waiting for the hand to open instead of squeezing. And when that hand opens, when Scorpio genuinely reaches that point, what emerges is not just an isolated opportunity. It's a clarity about who you truly are when you're no longer defined by what you carry. It's a newfound ability to relate to people, to work, to your own life, without the filter of what has been. It is, in many cases, the first time in a long time that you can imagine the future without it being tainted by the shadow of the past. This territory, what lies beyond a genuine choice to let go, is precisely what the digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, was built to help you access. Not as a vague promise, but as a concrete, personalized path tailored to how Scorpio processes transformation, with depth, resilience, and that intensity which, when well directed, becomes the engine of a truly prosperous life. If what you've visualized here makes sense to you, if you recognize that there's something waiting on the other side, that's the sign. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Percent sent CTA2 fin% sent. There's a Scorpio you haven't fully met yet, not because it doesn't exist, but because it only appears on the other side of a choice you're still close to making. This Scorpio is no different from you. They've been through the same waters, they've felt the same weight, they've had the same moments of resistance, of doubt, of what if I let go of this and nothing's left. They've had the same fear that the pain they'd kept so carefully once released would mean that it all didn't matter, but he went. With all the difficulty that this sign carries, with all the intensity that accompanies each profound decision, he went. And what he found on the other side was not the emptiness he feared. It was clarity, a clarity that doesn't shout, that doesn't need an audience, that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. A silent and absolutely solid clarity about who he is, what he wants, and what he deserves to receive. The prosperity that this Scorpio built didn't come about despite letting go. It came because he let go. Because the energy I spent holding on to the past became available to build the future. because the hands that were occupied became open, because the space that was filled with what had already served its purpose became available for what was coming. You don't need to let go of everything at once. That's not how Scorpio works, and it never will be. This is how it goes, one burden at a time, with depth, with intention, with that quiet seriousness that is your most authentic mark. But it starts with a decision, and sometimes the decision begins simply with an honest question asked in a moment of silence. What am I holding on to that no longer serves who I am becoming? You don't need to have the answer right now. You just need to stop avoiding the question, because a Scorpio who doesn't shy away from difficult questions is a Scorpio who eventually arrives at the answers that change everything. And when that happens, when this sign truly decides what will be left behind and what will move forward, there is no force in the universe capable of holding back what it is capable of building. This is the deepest nature of Scorpio. Not the one that resists everything, the one that knows when to resist and when to let go. Not the one that keeps everything, the one that chooses, consciously and powerfully, what deserves to be kept. There is a river that never stops, not because it doesn't feel the weight of the stones at the bottom, not because the current is always calm or the path is always clear. The river never stops because flowing is its most essential nature. The stones remain. The river continues. Scorpio has this nature, not the nature of a stone that resists water, the nature of a river that knows that movement is life, that what is left behind is not lost. It is what allowed you to get where you are, and that the next stretch of the path only exists because you had the courage to let the previous one be the past. Leaving something behind isn't about diminishing who you were. It's about honoring who you're becoming. And you, Scorpio, have everything you need to make that choice.